I played a game this month. I played Quantum Break, which has been on my to-do list since it released. It came out in 2016. It's a sci-fi action-adventure third-person shooter, which was developed by Remedy Entertainment and published by Microsoft Studios. So it is a Xbox/Windows exclusive. The game centers on Jack Joyce, who was granted time manipulation powers after a failed time machine experiment, who then comes into conflict with former friend Paul Serene over how to deal with an apocalyptic end of time. And that end of time is, in fact, literal. It also includes platforming and junction points at certain spots in the game, which are forks, point of no return type of stuff. It also features episodes of an integrated live action television show featuring the actors that portray the characters in the game. The TV show episodes are unique depending upon some choices that you make in the game. There are little extended segments that you get by finding certain unlockables within the game. So this was originally envisioned to be a sequel to Alan Wake, which was Remedy's last game. Jacob talked about the remastered version a few months ago. So that game was very focused on its thematic and narrative structure. And they wanted to advance that with a time travel narrative, but they decided to make a whole new IP. And that's where Microsoft Studios got involved for the funding. This is a extremely high budget production, especially from a smaller studio. Jacob, are you familiar with the trope in fiction of Born Beautiful Yesterday? Maybe, kind of, sort of.
So the washed up, ruggedly handsome detective that got busted for a crime he didn't commit, and now he's just a freaking private investigator?
Not at all. So Born Beautiful Yesterday is basically when a character, it's always a woman, is whether literally or metaphorically born yesterday. So they're portrayed as being immature and vulnerable and naive, but they're also hot as ever loving shit. And the main character is just trying to bone them the whole time. It's not a good trope. It's just used very commonly. So say Clockwork Orange is a pretty good example of that.
I haven't seen it.
Okay, well, it's something that pops up, and it's bad. There is a similar trope that's less problematic, and it's the flip side of that, which is what this game is. And it's Born a Superhero Tomorrow, and it's something I'm dubbing because I think it's cool. It is a type, this happens a lot in, I think, middle-aged dad fiction. It's the I'm a normal guy who has average skills and is moderately good looking, but by the end of this story, I'm going to be a god. And that's kind of what happens with this. So Jack Joyce is your normal dude. He's in his early 30s. He's vaguely attractive, and he's just a normal guy. He's kind of nice. He has very little backstory. But over the course of the game, he ends up going god mode. The developers have described this game as a superhero origin story of sorts, and I think that definitely shows. So just to run through the actors real quick. So this is a very motion capture heavy game for not just the in-game models, but the cutscenes as well. And then obviously the television episodes. So Sean Ashmore plays the pro tag Jack Joyce. Aidan Gillen, who you would probably know as Littlefinger from Game of Thrones, plays the antagonist Paul Serene, who is one of Jack's high school / college best friends. And Dominic Monaghan plays William Joyce, Jack's older brother, who was also friends with Paul. And Lance Reddick plays Martin Hatch, who is kind of the secondary antagonist. That's a very complicated thing. There's also Patrick Heisinger as Liam Burke, who is the head of security staff for the antagonist company Monarch, and a bunch of other people. It's got a pretty large cast, to be honest. Basically, You are invited to a super secret science experiment early in the morning by your old bestie. And he's like, just come here. It'll be fine. I'll show you what I'm working on. And then you do time travel and shit goes fucking crazy immediately. This game includes, I think, round about 4 timelines running kind of concurrently. It's very confusing. This game also, it works a lot more on like the vibe. Like if you think about it too hard, it'll hurt your head, even if it like does make sense. Just kind of run with it. The whole game takes place within about a 24-hour period from Jack's perspective. But for other characters, some of them have lived multiple lifetimes. Some of them come back from the dead effectively. There's a lot of stuff that happens. You are trying to prevent the end of the world from happening. And by the end of the world, it's the end of time. Like time in and of itself will unravel. There's a time bomb that goes off basically. And that's the setting for the gameplay as well as the story and like all of its themes and messaging and whatnot. There's a lot of plot to go through, so I'm not going to. There's actually a lot of stuff which I don't necessarily think they're spoilers, but I think it does work pretty well not knowing anything going into it. So things have a lot more impact. You become like an overnight terrorist to people because of your involvement and the media's interaction with public incidents, let's say, as well as the bad company Monarch, who's headed up, it turns out, by your best friend Paul, but Paul from the past, but from the future, because he's seen the end of time. So he went back in time to prevent it by starting a company to make new technology and so on and so on. That's how all of the plots weave together, is like every character has different character models that are clearly different ages, and you kind of have to parse out which one is doing what when, which I think is
the classic. It's the classic problem with Terminator is like John Connor wouldn't exist if he hadn't gone back in time and banged what's her face? It's
yes.
Yeah. It's a paradox, so it doesn't work.
Despite it having kind of a vibes-based function, I guess, through the game itself, apparently had a lot of research done in terms of like the science of how this could potentially work. So it on the back end, it's written really detailed. So yeah, it's a very high concept science fiction. Can you change your fate? Can you undo things that have already been done? Does it matter? Etc. Etc. Most of the game works towards that theme more than anything else. And I think that's kind of the game's strong point, is it has a very strong feeling to it. Some of its presentation can be a little generic, especially for the mid 2010s, like action movie aesthetic and whatnot. But I think it kind of undersells the game for what it actually has going on under the hood, like technologically speaking, as well as story wise. I think it's really easy to underestimate the game. Performances for the motion capture and voice work is phenomenal across the board. The budget really went into getting high profile actors for this, and I think it worked really well. The television segments it's not a companion television show. It's like literally it's like half of the plot is divulged to you through the show. It focuses on side characters. So little details you'll notice in the gameplay or during the cutscenes will be relevant in the TV show. It'll be like, oh, that's how that person got to this location or whatever. So it primarily focuses on people you would consider on the antagonist team, and it works on humanizing them, which I think it does fairly well in the end. In terms of how the TV show actually is, like quality wise, it's like high-end network TV. It's not like streaming service levels of quality, but it's not bad by any means. It's serviceable. The performances are really good. It has the same writing quality as most of the game. The technical aspects of the writing, like structure and Detail work and callbacks are phenomenal, but a lot of the dialogue is really rough, just across the board. There's a lot of like, you're going to need to kill me once and for all. And it's like, kill yourself. Just, it's got a lot of really mediocre dialogue. The actors sell it, but man, sometimes it can be a lot of rough lines back to back. So the general presentation of trying to blur the lines, I guess, between game and TV didn't work at all. It was too early for this, technologically speaking. I think it was a really cool idea, and I appreciated playing it and watching it together. But I really think that the fact that it includes 4 episodes of about 30 minutes of TV that you kind of have to watch at the end of each act of the story to get it, it's just, it didn't work for what they wanted. I think it more so demonstrates that you could have just done it with motion capture cutscenes, because the cutscenes that they have for this game they've aged flawlessly. They're insanely impressive to this day, and they're 6 years old. It's nuts. So the cutscenes are phenomenal, and the TV hasn't aged that great. So it's just kind of a weird experiment they tried that I don't really think panned out, but I commend them for trying.
I want to say it released like super broken too, like the game, and they had to patch it with huge patches later, if I remember right.
I heard stuff about that. I think it was primarily the PC version was really busted on launch. But it was definitely fixed pretty early because the review scores are really solid, and those don't get updated after like the first year of release. So it reviewed pretty well. I think it was like the opening. It had a really big day one patch type deal. General presentation is very solid. The soundtrack is really good. It's sometimes overpowered by a lot of sound effects, not by the sound mixing, but like when your powers activate, you will start hearing noises, and it just kind of muddies the mix. The user interface is very good and clean, simple to use. It's not clunky or overly complex. And the act structures make the game very easy to follow despite its convoluted storyline. Technologically speaking, the game ran well for me. I'm playing on the Xbox Series X console. I had one really large stutter that nearly killed the game in the last 20% of it. I guess just too much shit loaded in at once, because there are things in the game called stutters where time freezes and the game gets kind of weird. But this was like a real stutter. Like the game just stopped for a good 2 minutes and then kicked back in. So that was
sounds like a meta joke on you, but whatever.
Yeah, I really don't think so. Other than I couldn't access my Xbox's home menu. So,
I don't know, man. Sounds like the Red Ring of Death fake out in Arkham Asylum.
Other than that, technologically speaking, I'm really impressed with how well this holds up. This began production during the cusp of that previous generation pushing into 1080p category. Like the base game would always be 720p, but they would aim for 1080 if possible. And this thing looks like it could have released like last year. It looks better than most games coming out now, other than some elements here and there. The level of fidelity on the cutscenes, like I said, we're talking like Blur's Halo cutscenes level of quality. It's insane. The gameplay looks very good in terms of visuals, stuttering. Particle effects are a really big part of this game because of time slowing down and starting up constantly. Bullets will just sit in the air for like a minute or two at a time. And the amount of individual items this game has to keep track of all at once and not slow down or get like slogged on is really impressive. Just the type of way that the game plays as with your powers starting and stopping and kicking in, and all the different, you'll have 10 people in a room all activating different time powers that are doing different things while the world is frozen, and it all runs smoothly and coherently is really, really impressive. Most games can't pull anything like that off at all. The textures are extremely high resolution, and the models are fairly high in terms of their
polygons.
Thank you. Many polygons, particularly for a game that started production in 2013. It might be because the entire environment will get flipped upside down and shaken around like a snow globe at any moment. Everything is really detailed. There's very few copy pasted assets, which is quite impressive for the size of the game. The big highlight, I think, here that makes the gameplay hold up so well in terms of visuals is the lighting engine. Apparently, they had to rework part of the Northlight engine, which is what this runs on. It's basically just Remedy's in-house engine. They had to do a new version of like non-specific lighting. So how the world is illuminated, but not from an actual light source. And it really shows because the game looks very good. With my very low technical knowledge, but like desire to appreciate artistry, it seems like whenever a game looks good, it's either high polygons, high resolution models, or like a really good lighting engine. I think the lighting engine does it here because you'll have so many different colors of lighting from different areas. You'll have different types of diffusion. It actually feels like real lighting. You have harsh white lights, soft orange lights. You have like neon and LED greens and blues and whatnot. It's intense. And I think that really, really, really pushes it to be that level of really uncanny valley sometimes. There are two qualms I have with its visuals. One is my greatest enemy. It's motion smoothing. Everything in this game has motion smoothing on it, and it takes a while to get used to. I get why they would want motion smoothing on this, at least to some extent, but when getting used to the playing as the third person character model for the first couple of hours, it really takes getting used to like not feeling tripped out by how much motion smoothing there is on your actions. Not a huge fan of that. Just it's a lot to take in. And there is a lot of pop in here. It actually happened more in the first half of the game than the second, despite the second half being a lot more like processor heavy. Just there's a lot more going on. I'm not sure why that happened like that, but there is definitely pop in problems. It's just not egregious. It's here and there. It'll like a certain area will be pretty bad. And I can put up with that. It's fine. Gameplay wise, in and of itself, the actual gameplay is pretty standard Remedy style third person shooting. The shooting mechanics in and of themselves are fine. They're passable. They're nothing spectacular. It's a little clunky movement wise, like moving your character with the left stick is just a little imprecise. I think the time powers really help make up for the clunkiness of the shooting because you can speed up, slow down around people. You can slow down time to aim your shots, et cetera, et cetera. So it works in tandem together. I'm not sure if that's a sacrifice that they made to be able to have so many powers in your wheelhouse or not. But it kind of feels like that. There's about 10 weapons in total. Most of them are just subtypes. It's handgun, shotgun, carbine rifle, assault rifle, and SMG. There's also an LMG. And then everything else is kind of just a variant of that. It makes it easier to focus on the gameplay in and of itself instead of looking for stat boosts on your weapons. It just feels like you pick up what's around you and you can make it work. And I like that style of gunplay in my third-person shooters. I can't explain why. I just like focusing on the actual shooting and the fun of it rather than the like stat boosting. The guns all feel fine. None of them are particularly more or less fun than any of the other ones, and that's fine. I don't really have a qualm with that. The sound effects for said guns are very good. They shoot well. They all have purposes in the field. The platforming is bad. There's a lot of platforming in this game. Most of it is linear as fuck, and that's kind of the problem. It's just, despite the game wanting you to think there are so many unlimited options and so much potential because of your powers and what you could do with them in theory, most of the platforming sections are just really obvious where you're supposed to go. The actual climbing like animations are really, really janky. It's like, it reminded me of playing Watch Dogs. Like, they're there and you have to use them, but they're not fun. They could be worse. And that's about it. It just enables you to climb over boxes and fences. And as the normal guy protagonist, it makes sense. I'm not expecting like Assassin's Creed parkour in this game. So it's fine, but it does get agitating at points. When it comes to puzzles, most of them are really well disguised QuickTime events. It'll consist of you rewinding or forwarding time or stopping time to, say, prop open a door or zoom into a door before it closes, stuff like that. It's all pretty straightforward. I wasn't confused or overwhelmed by any of it, but it's fine. It's fun. It's cute, if nothing else. It's got its charm to it. The thing here that's really the seller, I think, especially for me, is the story. And it's kind of a mixed bag. I think the story, if you lay it all out on a table, is top tier science fiction. But I think the way that they present it, or the storytelling in and of itself, is not great. And I think a lot of it is the formatting between the television episodes, the animation, the animated cutscenes, the gameplay, and all of the in-game collectibles. Effectively, you have computer notes, sticky notes, emails, texts, etc., like radio reports, and I love all of that sort of stuff. I think this game finds a good way to use those additional storytelling elements, whereas it adds to the story. It's not required. And there's just a lot of them, but it doesn't make you feel bad for not looking at them. You know, like there's just a billboard in like a corkboard in the room. You should go read it and see what's on it. But if you don't, it's fine. But I think it really does add to it like a lot to understand the full picture of what's going on, how many people are involved, what the timelines look like, how events line up. I think that's really cool. But I think that so much of it was disseminated to the player through skippable notes and stuff, as well as really a really bad framing device of the whole game taking place through an interview that takes place after the events of the game. So there's constant voiceover. It was a really bad decision. It's very intrusive and unnecessary. It doesn't come together the way that it wants to. And I think that's more disappointing than it is frustrating. It's just kind of sad because the quality is definitely there. The game wants you to question all of the characters and why they're doing what they're doing. Everyone has ulterior motives. It wants you to think about how those relations all work together. The choices you make during basically the end of each act will have you play as the antagonist for a junction point where you can say, it'll make you choose between two characters that are on your side, but you have to pick which one is the traitor. And then the game will change based on that. Stuff like that I think is really cool. It just doesn't come together as much. It's not as cohesive playing from start to finish as it should be, or as it could be. On top of the collectibles, there's also collectible, basically XP points. They're called Chronon sources or whatever. It's like magical time juice that you find in the world because of the time bomb going off. It upgrades your different powers. It's nothing exciting. It works fine. It's not overwhelming. There's 60 of them in total spread throughout about the whole game. It's all doable. I got all of them on my first playthrough. It just makes playing the game a little easier. And I like that it's not an overwhelming skill tree. So on the whole, it's a very high-minded game that pushes the technology in a really interesting direction, especially for the time. But it does underestimate what the technology can do. Because I think this game, the way that they probably thought they could do it originally, is doable with the technology they used. And that's hindsight, you know? I don't think there was some critical error in their thinking. It's just they aimed for the stars, but they felt the need to add guardrails, if that makes sense. Whereas I don't think it was necessary to add guardrails. They could have just taken their hands off the wheel and just fucking gone for it, and they don't. But the potential was definitely there. It's really fun on the whole. It gives you strong moments, but when the game is over, I didn't have a strong feeling other than I have feelings. And I think that's kind of sad because it does end on like a big moment. It's a kind of cliffhanger sequel bait ending. And I was like, I would play that, but I'm more so thinking about the rest of the game. It ends on kind of a profound, not to spoil it exactly, but like now that the game is over, the villain has been defeated, etc., you have an injunction point as the protagonist. And the point is, wow, look, perspective, you could be the bad guy, like all of that sort of stuff. It's asking you to question your own motives and why you played the way that you played. And I think that's cool. It could definitely come across as like cheap sequel bait. That's like, oh, are you the bad guy now? And it's like, that's clearly not it, but I think that's what most people took from it. There were rumors of a sequel for a while. It did not materialize. I think that has more to do with Xbox Game Studios than it does Remedy. Because in the end, the game sold very well. And it was reviewed pretty well across the board. But I just don't think it made enough money for Xbox. It did not become a new Gears of War or Halo. So Remedy went back to the drawing board, and then they made their next game, Control, which works off of a very similar concept and sounds like is a lot better without a lot of the additional jank that this game had by kind of marketing itself like a big blockbuster action movie. And that's probably for the best. It's a really cool idea that didn't 100% pan out.
What price did you spend for Quantum Break?
Ooh, last thing before I tell you the price. The story would have taken roughly 10 to 12 hours to complete if I wasn't aiming for all the collectibles. I hit about 20 hours. I think it might have been up to 22, and I got nearly 100% completion on normal difficulty. I bought this for, I believe, $20 or $25. I think I got it off of Amazon brand new. And it was definitely worth that for sure.
You highly recommend or sort of recommend?
I would recommend it for anyone who likes Remedy games or things like that. If you're a fan of third-person shooters, I'm not sure how much the gameplay will intrigue you because it wants to be more focused on the powers, and the shooting is mid. And the cover system, I didn't even mention, it's like a soft cover system. You kind of just automatically crouch when you're near a box, and there's no blind firing, which I really like because I hate cover systems with a burning passion. I think they're fucking stupid, but I get why people were frustrated. So if you like third-person shooters or you're into sci-fi, probably, I think you would at least find it interesting, and you wouldn't hate it. I'm
definitely interested.
It's definitely worth playing. I wouldn't highly recommend it to anyone who ever wants to play a video game, but this is if I have to give it a number, just because that would be an easy example, it's like a 7.5 out of 10.
Perfect.
It's like it's very good, but it has a lot of very large flaws.